Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode. In tonight's episode, we talk one-to-one with Avi Loeb to ask, did an alien life form do a drive-by in our solar system? But first, a shout-out to tonight's sponsor, Podcorn. Podcorn is a marketplace connecting fearless podcasters to amazing podcast opportunities. And thank you to www.zapsplat.com for that cool UFO-sounding sound effect that you're about to hear in 1, 2, 3. In late 2017, scientists at a Hawaiian observatory glimpsed an object soaring through our inner solar system, moving so quickly that it could only have come from another star. Astrophysicist Avi Loeb showed that it was not an asteroid. It was moving too fast along a strange orbit and left no trail of gas or debris in its wake. There was just one conceivable explanation. The object was a piece of advanced technology created by a distant alien civilization. In his new book, Extraterrestrial, The First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, Avi Loeb takes readers inside the thrilling story of the first interstellar visitor to be spotted in our solar system. He outlines his unorthodox hypothesis about the object, which has come to be known as Oumuamua, and describes its profound implications for science, for religion, and for the future of our species and our planet. Kirkus Reviews calls Extraterrestrial a tantalizing, probing inquiry into the possibilities of alien life. New York Times bestselling author and theoretical physicist Sean Caro says, Avi Loeb's sumptuously written book will provoke you to think about the possibility of intelligent life elsewhere in the universe in new and stimulating ways. For what it's worth, I give it 2 thumbs up too.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Avi Loeb is the Frank B. Baird Jr. Professor of Science at Harvard University, where he was the longest-serving chair in the history of the astronomy department from 2011 to 2020, and where he directs the Black Hole Initiative and the Institute for Theory and Computation. He also chairs the advisory committee for the Breakthrough Starshot Initiative and the Board on Physics and Astronomy of the National Academies, and serves as the science theory director for all initiatives of the Breakthrough Prize Foundation. The author of 5 books and 800 scientific papers, Avi Loeb is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Physical Society, in the International Academy of Astronautics. In 2012, Time magazine selected Avi Loeb as one of the 25 most influential people in space. Okay, we're here with Avi Loeb, an astrophysicist who is really in demand nowadays. Avi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're both in Massachusetts, and I think last night we both looked up at the stars and 14 inches of snow fell on us. Is that about what you got where you're living?
Yes, but in fact, it was not only from the sky, because every morning at 5 a.m. I jog outdoors, and I enjoy the company of ducks, rabbits, and birds. And this morning I jogged as well. I mean, I don't mind if there is snow on the ground and it's raining or anything. It was a beautiful sight to see everything covered in white.
Yeah, I'm one of those fools in Massachusetts who bought a house with a flat roof, so I kind of have been shoveling all day trying to get it off my roof. But anyways, we're here. I read in an interview in Scientific American where you've been going nonstop. You get up at 5 a.m., as you mentioned. If you're not jogging, you're doing an interview. You've done about 100 podcasts over the past few weeks and lined up ahead, not to mention TV and cable. How do you find the time to do all this?
Well, that's usually my routine in terms of work. I usually dedicate most of my time to research, some to administration. I have leadership positions. I used to be the department chair of the astronomy department for 9 years at Harvard. And I'm still the director of 2 centers at Harvard, the Institute for Theory and Computation and the Black Hole Initiative. Together with my work with students and postdocs, I used to work almost nonstop. But now, over the past few weeks, because of the book, there is a huge demand on my time from reporters that ask to speak with me. And I see that as an important opportunity. There is a platform that allows me to express my views, and I try to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is more about promoting your book in Oumuamua. It's really about changing a mindset in the scientific community, isn't it?
Right. So the issue that I have primarily is the current scientific culture is not willing to discuss the search for technological signatures, the search for intelligent civilizations out there. And we can discuss why. But at any event, that's a fact of life. And there is not much funding to this, and young people are not encouraged to enter that field. And it's sort of like stepping on the grass and then saying, look, it doesn't grow. Out of modesty, I don't think that we are special and unique. And, when I remember my daughters when they were infants, they tended to think that they are unique and the world centers on them. But when they went to the kindergarten, they met other kids and got a better perspective that there are kids that are more talented than they are. For our civilization to mature, we really need to seek others. And if we don't look for unusual things in the sky, we will never find others. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you put blinders, if you never look through Galileo's telescope, you would never recognize that the Earth moves around the sun. And that's what happened. The philosophers at the time did not look at Galileo's telescope. They put him in house arrest. And the only thing they accomplished was to maintain their ignorance at that time. The Earth continued to move around the sun. Reality doesn't care whether we ignore it or not.
With that as a setup, I'd like to read an excerpt from your book, which I enjoyed very much, if you don't mind. Kind of talks about that. So it says, the Milky Way hosts tens of billions of Earth-sized planets with surface temperatures similar to our own. Overall, about a quarter of our galaxy's 200 billion stars are orbited by planets that are habitable in the way Earth is, with surface conditions that allow liquid water and the chemistry of life as we know it. Given so many worlds, 50 billion in our own galaxy, with similar life-friendly conditions, it's very likely that intelligent organisms have evolved elsewhere. And that's counting only habitable planets within the Milky Way.
Right.
Adding all other galaxies in the observable volume of the universe increases the number of habitable planets to a zeta, or 10 to the 21st power, a figure greater than the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on Earth. So that seems to make perfect sense. With that type of thinking, why do so many of your peers try to find every conceivable angle to kind of argue against what you've laid out, I think, very logically and rationally in your book?
Well, that's an excellent question. And there are several possible answers to it. One is that people prefer generally to believe that they're at the center of the stage and that they are unique, special. It flatters their ego to have a special place. And of course, if we are alone, we are really unique and serve an important purpose in the universe. But if there are many like us, if we are just like ants on the sidewalk, it's really not so flattering. And people prefer to hold on to a flattering image until proven wrong. And so they would resist any attempt to tell them that they are not the smartest kid on the block. So that's one possible explanation. And we know that because starting from the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, humans prefer to believe that we are at the center of the universe, but now we know we are not. So that's one aspect of it. And then there is also the fact that people are in their comfort zone. We are used to thinking just about physical objects out there and nothing really alive. And because we haven't found yet evidence, that is a comforting thought. And the scientists prefer to stay within that comfort zone. We will talk about the object that triggered my book, and it's called Oumuamua. And, there was a seminar about this object at Harvard. And when I left the room, together with a colleague of mine that worked on rocks within the solar system for decades, that colleague of mine said, "This object is so weird, I wish it never existed." That was appalling to me because nature's way of educating us, of telling us there is something you don't fully understand, is by giving us evidence that does not quite line up with what we expected. I call this anomalies. We should be happy when nature does it because it's all about learning new things. That's the thrill of doing science. I'm really excited when something doesn't quite work out because then there is a chance that I figured out something that was not known before. But there is a tendency of people to stay in the comfort zone, to think that everything that we will find in the future should line up with what we knew in the past. And that's unfortunate. It makes the scientific endeavor boring and not really exciting. The other thing is, just like kids in a kindergarten, whenever something different shows up, people like to ridicule it, like to bully whoever talks about it. I suddenly feel that although I don't have any footprint on social media, I don't care how many likes I have on Twitter, but I do recognize the fact that there is groupthink and people feel powerful when they ridicule anything that deviates from what everyone else was saying for a while.
We're going to get into that trigger event in just one question, but first, what kind of blows my mind is that people embrace, look, I like concepts like string theory and the multiverse and supersymmetry and all that stuff, but in your book, you state pretty eloquently that there's less evidence based on those theories than there is for yours, but yet that's the sort of stuff that people will be okay with versus what you put out there.
Yes, exactly. And the one feature that all these ideas have, like superstring theory or supersymmetry, is that they involve mathematical sophistication, and that allows people to do mathematical gymnastics and show that they are smart. So if you regard academic work as a tool to demonstrate that you are smart, you don't care whether it relates to nature. Who cares? If a group of people decides that working in anti-de Sitter space, some fictitious space, which is not the one we live in, is an interesting place to solve equations, then that's just like deciding 100 meters in the Olympics is a distance that we define as the distance used to measure the speed of runners, of athletes. And then whoever does it best, whoever is most capable, gets a job, gets prizes, gets honors. But who cares whether it describes nature? There is nothing to it except for measuring people's abilities. And a lot of academic work these days is geared towards getting honors, awards, and less so about trying to explain nature. Because if that was the motivation, then all these ideas about extra dimensions, superstring theory, they would be at the periphery. They would be regarded as speculative, irrespective of how much mathematical sophistication they carry. Speaking about Aristotle, his idea of us being at the center and having spheres around us was very sophisticated. And, the Ptolemaic system invented a fancy mathematics to describe the motion of the planets. And in principle, it was mathematically very appealing, but it was just wrong. So nature sometimes is simple, doesn't really require fancy mathematics, and you just need to figure it out. And it's not about us. It's not about us showing off. It's about a dialogue that we have with nature, listening to the evidence and coming up with appropriate explanation. And speaking about evidence, that's exactly what drove me in the direction of saying that Oumuamua was an unusual object. I didn't come out of an abstract notion that it should be that. I just paid attention to the evidence, and that's what brought me in this direction. So that is being ridiculed, the possibility that it's artificial, while at the same time, you find the mainstream of theoretical particle physics dealing with concepts like the multiverse and the landscape and extra dimensions, to which we have no evidence, and we might not have any evidence in the future. There are even philosophers that argue you don't need empirical, you don't need experiments. We can do physics just like that if a group of physicists agrees on it.
Yeah, so let's get to that trigger event for your book, Oumuamua. So it passed the Earth in October 2017. It was observed by a Canadian astronomer as it was already past the sun with one of the most powerful telescopes at that time, a telescope in Hawaii called Pan-STARRS 1. We almost missed it. Why is that?
Well, first of all, we didn't expect it. I actually wrote a paper just a decade before, together with two colleagues, forecasting how many such interstellar objects we should expect. These are objects not bound to the sun that come from outside the solar system and enter the solar system. There were rocks that, let's say, ripped apart from other planetary systems. And our prediction was that Pan-STARRS will not find anything by a large margin, by orders of magnitude. And then Pan-STARRS discovered Oumuamua, the first interstellar object. That by itself was a surprise. And he discovered it when it was already moving away from us in October 2017. And that's an important distinction, because if it would have discovered it in July 2017 on its approach to us, then we could have gotten much more data about it. But at any event, when it was discovered, people said, oh yeah, it's probably just a comet. Because comets are the most common objects that you get in the solar system. They come from the periphery of the solar system, loosely bound to the sun. And you can imagine comets being ripped apart from other planetary systems by passing stars, because they're so loosely bound that they can be easily ripped off those and become interstellar objects. The only problem is Oumuamua didn't show any cometary tail. A comet has ice on the surface, and when it comes close to the sun, it warms up, and you end up with the ice turning into gas, and you see this beautiful trail of gas and dust behind it. But we haven't seen anything around Oumuamua. Not only we haven't seen anything visually, but also the Spitzer Space Telescope looked very deeply and couldn't trace any carbon-based molecules around this object. So it was clearly not a comet. Also, in addition, as it was tumbling, it looked as if the object has a very extreme geometry. The brightness of the object, due to reflected sunlight, varied by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling. And that implies that projected on the sky, it was at least 10 times longer than it is wide. And the best model to explain the variation in the amount of light reflected from it was that of a flat object, pancake-like, not cigar-shaped the way it was depicted in a famous cartoon. So a pancake-like object, no cometary tail, and then it showed an excess push away from the sun along its orbit. The force that acted on it varied inversely with distance squared and was very smooth with distance. The question is, what provided this extra push? And the only thing that I could think of is reflected sunlight. And for that to be effective, you need the object to be very thin. So not only flat, but very thin. And that reminded me of a sail on a boat, that is pushed by wind, except here it's the light of the sun that is pushing on it. And this is called the light sail. We are currently developing this technology for space exploration, and the advantage of it is the spacecraft doesn't need to carry any fuel. You can just push it with light. Actually, just a few months ago, in September 2020, there was an object that showed an excess push from the sun as a result of reflecting sunlight and no cometary tail. Turns out this was a rocket booster from 1966 that we produced. The question is, who produced Oumuamua?
Chapter 3 of your book starts with a sentence that says, science is like a detective story. And you kind of go over the anomalies, which you just mentioned, the size, the shape, the luminosity. You said when you take all the different factors that you noticed, when you add them all together, this becomes like a 1 in a trillion object in the sky, which really you take each of those different things and you add them together, it becomes highly unlikely it's a natural forming event.
Exactly.
And you also mentioned that, like you said, you didn't go into this looking at this looking to make it be extraterrestrial. Things just kind of surfaced. And almost like Sherlock Holmes, when the facts kind of came to you, whatever was left was the truth you stuck with.
Yes, exactly. Now, if you look at the response of the scientific community, it divides into three parts. There are people that are not really scientists, they're not active scientists, but they write blogs, they write on Twitter, and they would say, oh, yeah, forget about it, it's a rock, and add to it all kinds of fluff. I don't even pay attention to those because they are not practicing scientists. But then you have the bulk of the mainstream scientific astronomy community, which says, don't bother me with the details, it's a rock. So they would just say, it's very unlikely to be anything else, it's never aliens, forget about it. To them, I say, okay, well, you didn't really explain the evidence, so why should I listen to you? Then there is the third component, which is people that really pay attention to the anomalies and try to explain one of them at a time. So, for example, the fact that we didn't see a cometary tail, yet there was an excess push that usually for comets you get from the rocket effect. So there was a proposal that maybe this object was made of pure hydrogen. It was a hydrogen iceberg, frozen hydrogen. We've never seen anything like it. But the idea is if hydrogen evaporates, it's transparent. So you wouldn't see a cometary tail. And you would still get the rocket effect from the evaporation. The problem with that proposal is hydrogen can be evaporated very easily. So such an object would not survive the journey. We showed that in a follow-up paper that it wouldn't survive. And we don't know even if such things form in the first place in molecular clouds. So that doesn't quite work. And then other people suggested maybe it's a cloud of dust, very porous, 100 times less dense than air, being pushed by reflecting sunlight. Again, I have a problem with that because it wouldn't survive the journey. So these suggestions all invoked something that we've never seen before. And I say, if the people that attend to the details, to the anomalies of Oumuamua, have to come up with something that we have never seen before, and all of these proposals have a problem, one way or another, then contemplating an artificial origin makes sense. Why not? Why not put it on the table? And then next time we see an object like that, if we catch it on its path towards us, we can meet it along the trajectory and take a photograph, a close-up photo of it, and see if it's a rock or artificial. I'm all in favor of evidence. And why assume that we know the answer in advance? And for some reason, this point of view is controversial. I don't understand why.
Tonight's Afraid of Nothing episode is sponsored by Podcorn. Podcorn is a marketplace connecting fearless podcasters to amazing podcast sponsorship opportunities, such as host-read ads, interview segments, topical discussions, and more. I've had first-hand experience with Podcorn helping me find sponsors for my show, which is great because it helps offset production costs and lets me produce more shows for you. Win, win, win. And working with Podcorn is easy. So if you have a podcast and are searching for a sponsor, look no more. Check out Podcorn. With Podcorn, there's no middleman. Podcasters of all sizes can browse and choose opportunities right on the platform online, set their own rates, and collaborate with brands directly without any exclusivities. You never give up any rights to your podcast, and Podcorn is there to support you at every step and ensure you're protected and compensated for the work that you do for brands. The marketplace mission is to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and full control of how and when we monetize. With Podcorn, you never have to be afraid of finding a sponsor and getting paid. Click the link in my show notes to sign up to Podcorn and start browsing sponsorship opportunities after the show. You released a paper with a colleague, Shmuel Bailey, in the Astrophysical Journal Letters in 2018. You actually mentioned a couple different things, and one of them was, the hypothesis that it could be an alien interstellar object. And that's the one the press clung to. and you kind of got hammered for it. And then a couple of years later, you wrote this book. Was that the impetus for writing the book? Was as a follow-up to get your story out to a broader audience beyond just the scientific community?
Yeah, but also the fact that over the 2 years that elapsed between me writing the book and that paper, actually before the paper, I also wrote a Scientific American article about a possible technological relic. So I had the idea for a few months before we wrote the paper with Shmuel Bialy, who became my postdoctoral fellow in September 2018. But over the 2 years, there were other people trying to explain Oumuamua from a natural origin, and none of these alternative explanations made sense to me. So altogether, the story to me is more appealing now than it was at the beginning, because at the beginning I just proposed this and I thought, oh, maybe someone will come up with a better story, but nothing came out. And then I decided to write this book. It was a literary agent that contacted me when all the publicity came out. And at first I told her, no, I don't have time for this. I work mostly on research and I just don't have time for a book. And she insisted and came back to me a couple of times. And then I said, okay, well, maybe I'll write it. And so that's how it came about. This book is now getting a huge amount of attention all around the world. Today I was speaking with about 6 either TV or radio or newspaper outlets in the Spanish language only. Every day I have 8 to 10 interviews back to back. That was true for the last 3 weeks and will be true for the next 3 weeks based on all the scheduling that we arranged by now. And I'm very much looking forward to see what the statistics is in terms of the New York bestseller list tomorrow.
Well, from my perspective, every day I get articles about you, or I'll see, or I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I'll hear you on podcasts, Lex Friedman, or I saw you on Glenn Beck, or I'll see you on
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, Joe Rogan, all over the place. Going back real quickly to the 3 anomalies, maybe there's more. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it the push past the sun that really kind of got your attention and said, wait a minute? Was that aligned to the light sails, the things you were working on, the Starshot initiative, that you said, wait a minute, I've seen this before and maybe it could be this?
Exactly. Yeah, that was the thing. Before that, I was not clear about whether this object is unusual enough to write something in the context of an artificial origin. But once this came about, that's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for me.
I don't know if you believe, as a very rational person, if you believe in fate or whatever, but there's a couple things that led up to Oumuamua that I thought were interesting. One was you working on the Starshot initiative, which I'd like you to go into a little bit more detail for the audience. And the other was you had a family vacation that went to Hawaii, I think, right around when you said it would have been ideal if you had actually captured, you've been aware of it in the sky.
That's right. Yeah, it was July 2017. When Oumuamua was approaching us, and I wish the Pan-STARRS telescope where I visited, I was asked to give a seminar there. We were on vacation in Maui, and I went to that mountain. But back then, nobody knew about it. And then a few months later, it was discovered. Yeah, you might say that what's the chance that would happen? Probably very small, but it happened.
Yeah, and the Starshot initiative, that happened a couple of years before Oumuamua. Can you talk about how that came about and the whole, working with your students and coming up with the light sail? What was the premise of that project and kind of what you came up with?
Right. So the story starts in May 2015 when black limousine parked in front of the building where my office at Harvard is, Center for Astrophysics. And out of it came Yuri Milner, an entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, and together with the executive director of the foundation that he established, the Breakthrough Prize Foundation. And he came to my office, Yuri, and sat on the sofa and told me, Avi, we have a number of initiatives that we are about to announce, and I would like you to lead one of them and be an advisor to everything else. And the one is possible mission to visit the nearest star, which is in the Alpha Centauri system. It's Proxima Centauri. This star is 4 light years away, and so it takes light 4 years to travel the distance. So I want this to happen within my lifetime. That's what Yuri said. And he's exactly the same age as I am. So we're talking about 2 decades, let's say. And that means that the spacecraft needs to move at 1/5 of the speed of light. And I told him, of course, Yuri, I'll be glad to look into that. I cannot promise anything because it's not trivial to reach such a high speed, but I will check all possible technologies. And then together with my students and postdocs, we discussed all the possible technologies that were proposed before. And then 6 months later, I was in Israel. It was December 2015. And then I'm about to leave the room for a vacation with my family on a goat farm in the southern part of Israel. And I get a phone call from Yuri's executive director, Pete Warden, saying, Yuri would like you to report about your findings and what you think, whether it's feasible to have this project. And he wants you to come in 2 weeks to his home and discuss it. And I said, okay, thank you very much. I'm about to go to a goat farm, but I'll do my best to prepare the talk. So we got to the goat farm, and obviously there was no internet connectivity except at the office of that goat farm. So 6 a.m. the following morning, I sit with my back to the office and look at the newly born goats that were born just the day before, and typing into my laptop the presentation about the first funded project to visit the nearest star. And I'm sure that the farm owner never imagined that the first visit to the nearest star, the first interstellar trip, would be contemplated in his goat farm. At any event, I went to Yuri's home 2 weeks later, and he was very excited. The proposal was to use the only technology that seemed feasible was to use a light sail, a sail that is pushed by light, very lightweight, using a powerful laser to propel it to a fifth of the speed of light. If you work down the numbers, we're talking about the gram of material in the sail, carrying electronics, like a camera, navigation device, and a communication device, and then being pushed by a 100 gigawatt laser. And the size of the sail is roughly the height of a person. And over a distance that is 5 times the distance to the moon, the sail would cross that distance within a few minutes. Over that time, the laser beam is focused on it and allows it to reach that speed. So that was the concept. And then for several months, we iterated on it. Yuri was mainly interested in the challenges, in whether there is any showstopper. And we went through all possible problems that could arise in this technology, and we couldn't find any. So then in April 2016, we announced the project in New York City. Stephen Hawking came for the announcement, the public announcement. There were of all the 50 television crews in the room, and we just publicly announced it. It's interesting because my wife, on the same day, she brought the car for an oil change, and the mechanic asked her, "Where is your husband? Why didn't he bring the car?" And she said, "Well, he's in New York City announcing this project called Starshot." And the mechanic said, "Wow, I can't believe it. I followed all the details about this project. I'm really excited about it." Turns out that this project captured the imagination of the public, because since the Kennedy's announcement of the Apollo program, there wasn't really something about space that was as exciting. And so I'm very happy to be part of that.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out that fate thing again. Oumuamua is almost kind of like, it's the same type of light sail technology that you were thinking about. So it's almost connected, like you're working on Starshot. You're in Hawaii, right when it's going into our solar system, that you don't even know it, in June or July. And then Oumuamua almost kind of like validates your hypothesis that a light sail is a type of technology that would be successful in traveling to another galaxy.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Of course, the way I see it is that my imagination is limited to what I know. I was able to think about the light sail possibility as a result of working on a similar concept. Otherwise, I wouldn't even imagine it. So, but you're right. There is some interesting coincidence here, and I wouldn't, become religious based on that. But it's interesting that there are things in life that occur without a good explanation.
Yeah, and I think what kind of triggered something, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, was that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you think if we think of something, then probably alien technology might have too. So it could be a similar type of vehicle that you see, an interstellar object with some kind of the same technology. And that's why you probably thought, hey, this could be a light sail, even if it's a different type of design than what maybe you came up with.
Right. So, but in principle, it can be anything thin enough to be pushed by light. It could also be a surface layer of of a spaceship that was torn apart and it's just floating in space and showing this extra push. I mean, without it being designed on purpose for being a light sail. We just don't know because we didn't get enough data on this object. Most likely, the trash that we may find in space is not functional anymore, because if you imagine Voyager 1, Voyager 2, or New Horizons, these are probes that we sent out of the solar system. They will exit into interstellar space. And if you imagine them a billion years from now, they will not be functional. And most of the objects that collected in interstellar space are those that are quite old. So if I had to guess, I would think, it's just like walking on the beach and finding a plastic bottle, but most of these plastic bottles are not functional anymore.
Do you think that Oumuamua, the civilization that created it, is kind of a dead civilization? Because in your book, you mentioned that, a lot of civilizations, they have their time. They're all kind of mortal, right? They last a certain amount of time, and then for whatever, maybe it's the technology and they self-destruct or something else happens within the universe that affects them. Is your thought whoever invented this relic could have outlived them?
Well, most likely, if this is indeed an artificial object, most likely the civilization that created it is not around anymore. And, there are two ways to search for civilizations. And, you can search for radio signals, and that's analogous to having a phone conversation. You need the partner to be alive at the time of the conversation. But another way to get information from another person is to get a letter in the mail. And if the postal service is very slow, it takes a while for the letter to arrive to you. And during that time, the sender could die. And that's like looking for relics that were sent over the history of the Milky Way galaxy floating in space. And those that sent them may not be around. Most of the time, they will not be around anymore. It's just like doing archaeology. We cannot have a phone conversation with the Mayan culture because they're not around anymore. But we can find their relics and learn about how they lived their life through archaeological digs. I call that space archaeology.
Now, Oumuamua, we're not likely going to see a return of it. It's like a Bailey's comet. It doesn't come back. But you think there are many others that we will see, particularly if a new... I'm trying to think I'm trying to find the Vera C. Rubin Observatory. There's a new telescope that's coming.
Yes,
could you talk a little bit about that and kind of how that's going to improve our capability of having a watchful eye in the universe going forward?
Yeah, so when I go to the kitchen and I see an ant, I get alarmed because I know that it's not the only ant in the kitchen. There are many more, and I just happened to look at the small part of the kitchen and found it. So the same with Oumuamua. We looked at the sky for a few years. We found this object. There must be many more around, and we will find more. We wait a few more years with Pan-STARRS, but in fact, there is the Vera Rubin Observatory that will come online within a few years and will have much more sensitivity. So it could find an Oumuamua-like object every month. And of course, the advantage of finding more weird objects that share the properties of Oumuamua is that if we find one of them approaching us, we can send a camera that will take a close-up photo. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. I very much look forward to getting a better sense of the nature of these objects in a few years' timescale. So the way I see it, science is about reproducible results. So it's not a one-time event. It's not just one object. We shouldn't be obsessed with Oumuamua and try to chase it down. We can't really reach it. It's already 1 million times fainter than when it was close to the sun. But the point of the matter is that we found it over a few years period, and there should be many more like it. And we can find them and then study them much more carefully. I'm therefore hopeful that during my lifetime, I will know what this class of objects is.
So that's supposed to, I think, have its birth or whatever in 2022. Do you plan to go and visit the Vera C. Rubin Observatory? Is it in Chile?
Yeah, it's in Chile. It would be wonderful. I'll be glad to go there. I visited Chile, and not far from the location of this telescope. In fact, this telescope will survey the sky. It will find about 2/3 of all the objects, 60% of all the objects that come close to Earth, bigger than 140 meters. The reason that is interesting is because the Congress tasked NASA to find 90% of near-Earth objects above this size. This is roughly the size of Oumuamua. And the reason that Congress tasked NASA to do that is because we know that the dinosaurs were killed by a giant rock, roughly the length of Manhattan Island. It must have been a beautiful sight to see this rock getting bigger and bigger on the sky, and the fun stopped when it hit the ground. Even though we have much smaller bodies than the dinosaurs, you might think, oh, we will not survive for as long as they did. But in fact, we have a brain, and that allows us to survive much better than the dinosaurs, even though our bodies are so small. And our brain allows us to become astronomers and use telescopes to forecast whether objects are approaching us and then maybe deflect them. That's what Congress wanted astronomers to do. So the Vera Rubin Observatory will find 60% of those near-Earth objects that are bigger than 140 meters. 140 meters are a factor of 100 smaller than the size of the rock that killed the dinosaurs. But it could cause damage to cities, and we want to avoid that. That's the motivation for these surveys of the sky. But in the process of doing that, they find interstellar objects. And that's what Pan-STARRS did. And Vera Rubin Observatory will do the same. And with much higher sensitivity, there would be a huge amount of data coming from it and then analyzed by computer systems. And I don't really need to be there. I mean, I will just wait for the reports. But, it's an important eye that we will have into the sky that will allow us to discover more Oumuamua-like objects.
Yeah, I think that's a fourth happy coincidence. I keep throwing these out there, but I mean, that's another thing that's happening, the technology to enable us not to miss something that passes through now that Oumuamua is past, we realize it's not a total lost opportunity, but we should keep a watchful eye, and boom, this is happening. So
yes,
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a quote in your book that I really love. It was, the whole world is nothing but a very narrow bridge, and the key is not to be fearful at all. Can you tell our audience what this means in the context of Oumuamua?
Well, in that context, it's the fear that many people have of the notion that we are not the smartest kid on the block. Also, the fear of getting out of our comfort zone of things that we were used to in the past, that the universe contains only physical objects and nothing alive is out there. We don't know. You need to bring extraordinary evidence before we change our mind on that. So there is a lot of pushback and resistance to discovering, especially intelligence out there. I look for intelligence in the sky because I don't often find it on Earth. If you listen to the news every day, I mean, humans are doing really foolish things most of the time, and perhaps we can learn from them if there are things that are more intelligent than we are out there. First of all, it will inspire a sense of modesty for us, which is very needed because most people are quite arrogant for no good reason. One thing I learned from astronomy is to stay modest because we are such a small piece of the big picture and we also live for such a short time. How can anyone be arrogant? But also any accomplishment we have is, in the big scheme of things, not so significant. The best way to become modest is by finding more intelligent things out there, and that would have a huge impact on our society.
Yeah, I think your message is be modest, be humble, but don't be conservative. You only have a small time on this planet, so make those out-of-the-box assumptions and hypotheses and see where it takes you. Otherwise, you're constrained to a box, right?
Exactly. And think about it, looking at Earth from a distance, suppose these aliens are out there, hearing all the discussions about people arguing it's never aliens, and don't even check, it's always a rock. It just sounds like the caveman that is used to playing with rocks saying, that the cell phone is a shiny rock.
Yeah. You mentioned stuff, the news that's happening on Earth. There seems to be a trickling of disclosure type of stuff in the media under the cloud of COVID. If you think about in April 2020, the Pentagon released the 3 leaked UFO videos. In December 2020, a former Israeli space security chief said that extraterrestrials exist. In January, the CIA began declassifying UFO documents. I mean, even back in 2015, the Pope's chief astronomer confirmed that the Vatican Observatory in Rome, believed in life on other planets. What do you think about all that stuff? Do you think that maybe the tide is turning and people will be more receptive? The timing of your book probably is impeccable.
Well, I think the public is starved on this issue from the scientific community. For example, the UFO report, they were based on eyewitness testimony or instruments that were not really designed to be the very best to detect the evidence. And I think the best path forward is not to obsess with declassification of reports that were in the drawers at the Pentagon. These were taken with instruments that were far inferior relative to what we have today. So the best path forward is to deploy state-of-the-art instruments in the same locations where the reports came from, and look for anything unusual. Just like a standard scientific experiment, it's all about reproducibility. You want to see the evidence. So it always reminds me of this story about Abraham in the Old Testament, where he heard the voice of God saying, you need to sacrifice your only son, Isaac. And of course, if he had a cell phone with a voice memo up, he could have pressed the button and everyone would believe his story, but he didn't have that. So it's really essential to have recording devices to get everyone to believe your story. We have those devices. We should deploy them rather than pay attention to what these Pentagon papers say.
Okay, and now we're near the end of the interview. I just want to ask one very simple question. What is your favorite type of sci-fi movie that you've watched? Is there one that you think really gets it, that looking out, if you look for just entertainment, is there one movie or one film or one book that really you found enjoyment of and found inspirational?
Yeah, I found a few. The one I like the most is Arrival, because it deals with the philosophical question of how to communicate with aliens. And it doesn't go into the technical details of what the aliens are able to do. But others that I liked were The Martian and Gravity. And the storyline of those had some problems, in terms of not being consistent with the laws of physics, but they were not major. And most of the storylines that I see in the science fiction literature or movies are, really violate the laws of physics in many ways, and I cannot enjoy them.
In closing, I mean, look, your book is probably going to be pretty easy to find because you're all over, you're everywhere. But tell us where we can find your book and how we can follow what else that you're doing.
Well, the book is available for sale on Amazon or Barnes & Noble and any bookstore. It's called Extraterrestrial. And also, I have links for it on my website, including also my commentaries in Scientific American that discuss related topics.
Okay, and if you don't mind, one more question. After this, if you could solve one of the mysteries, dark matter, dark energy, or black holes, which do you think would be the most satisfying, and which do you think would be the first two that the human mind will get their head around?
Well, I very much hope that we will find that we are not the smartest kid on the block. That will be the first major discovery, and then we can ask them. We can ask them, what is the dark matter? We don't need to solve that puzzle. They will tell us if they are really smart.
That's great.
We can ask them what was before the Big Bang. And all the questions that bother us, it's sort of like copying in an exam, looking over the shoulder of the student next to you. But if it saves you a lot of time, why not?
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Well, thank you, Avi, so much for your time. I've enjoyed the interview, and I know your book's going to be a huge success, and I look for your next adventure.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.